Well, good evening, everybody. We're going to start. Maybe some people will join us, but we're going to look at the next layer of this question, who is Jesus? And we're going to do it by now moving through this, through the centuries, which means that we will be maybe entering some areas of history that not all of us have the benefit of learning. And I am not an expert. I've learned as much as I can to make sense, but of the topics. And some, I think I've made some good connections, but I'll be happy for your thoughts on why time period might have had a particular effect on seeing Jesus in new ways. I think it's pretty clear that we can see the same Jesus in different ways. We see him differently as a child, and that's not wrong. In fact, some preachers will say the best sermon is Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong. And yet that's obviously a child perspective. You might have a different perspective in adolescence. You might have one that's different after a time of grief or loss. So Jesus is viewable from different perspectives in our own lives. And hopefully, if we've been in a life of faith, that means that Jesus has continued to develop just like a really, really good roux, where you slowly stir until it's becoming more and more rich and more flavorful, and that at the apex of our lives we have really developed a variety of perspectives on Jesus that enrich our lives. I would say that probably our most difficult challenge in Christianity quite often is that people only have a very flat, one-dimensional view of Jesus, and it usually is whichever Jesus is the most appealing to them, and then they stick with that. The way out of that is to learn more perspectives of Jesus. So by the time we're done with this, I hope you will be very interested in having a multi-dimensional view of Jesus beyond where you started, and I hope that we can do that together. In the last several weeks, we looked at Jesus as he might have been experienced as a man that you would walk with and talk with. We talked about the insights of the historical Jesus. And did anybody have any insights about the insights of Jesus in his earthly ministry that was appealing to you or confusing? I think it's a good one to go back to again and again. And you might say, well, all you have to do is read the Gospels. But as we'll see, the Gospels are blessedly filled with images and perspectives on Jesus. And it does take some work to see and to know some of the aspects of his ministry, like being a rabbi, for example, something we're not familiar with very much. And yet, once you understand how a rabbi works and how a rabbi operates, you can really appreciate how Jesus was clearly that. Then last week, we talked about Jesus as seen now in reflection after the resurrection, and with the insights of the Gospels and Paul, and how Jesus gains more dimension as a person who is not limited to a rabbi, but now is a risen Lord, one that has been shown to be in unity with God, which is maybe not what they first experienced, but it's what they came to believe and what they came to share. So those are the last 2 weeks looking at Jesus from a decidedly feet on the ground perspective now to the risen Lord. And anybody have any questions before we go further? Right. So we're looking at Jesus now as some titles that, again, are upon further reflection, and hopefully that they'll be helpful for you. We're going to look at the view first today as Jesus is the turning point of history. Is everyone able to see that graphic there?
Yes. Looks great.
Yes.
Good. So Jesus as the turning point in history, not something that I would have thought of. A great reason, obviously, for pastors to teach is to keep learning. And as the turning point in history, I wasn't sure what the idea of that. But I think we'll see together. Is there a point in your life that you could put your finger on and say pretty much nearly everything changed from that point?
No, for me, I grew up with Jesus, so I don't know that there was a pivotal point. There were several times throughout my life so far that I can say, but there wasn't a single aha moment.
Okay. Some people say that don't regret not having a conversion, because that means you were always with the Lord. A nice thing to think about.
Sometimes he sort of sneaks in there, though. He just sort of just gets in there a little by little, and before you know it, you're there.
Okay. Yeah, if you're you could have a turning point in your career, I suppose, where you thought you were going to head in one direction, and something came along, and when you look back, you realize that whatever that was that came along changed everything for you. And you kind of look back at it and you say, that was the turning point. I don't know if it was the turning point with the FAU game, but with 6 minutes after the Owls had proceeded to give up 70 yards in penalties and pretty much allow Rice to get right at the red zone for no merit of their own. Adam and I got up from our seats and said, "That's about it." Walked down the stands, and as I'm looking just for one last look at the field, there I see an interception in the end zone by the Owls, and they ended up killing the clock and winning the game. So that was a turning point, obviously. And I almost missed it. So Pelican says in the chapter 2, and we're going to follow the chapters now. We're going to try to do three.
Andy, what is Pelican?
Oh, I'm sorry. That is the name of the author of the book, Jesus Through the Centuries.
Okay, I wanted to know if it was one of those Acropolis or what, the ones in between. Okay.
Oh, no, not Apocrypha. Nope. This is actually like a college class. I'll be going through chapters, and some people.
Right, you had told us about the book. I just didn't remember the author was Pelican.
Yeah. So chapter 2 is his turning point. I wasn't satisfied with his first chapter. In my mind, I felt we needed to do these others. So, but now I'm going to link up with him and what do we see in this picture of Jesus here? That it's an old one. Anybody put it in there?
Is that Alpha and Omega on the edges?
Exactly. Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. And this is a depiction you'll see of Jesus quite a bit at this era, and we'll see why that's the case.
Is the light radiating from behind like a halo?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. That's
got the circle of the halo.
his divinity.
A halo. Yeah.
But decidedly a raw portrait. And probably this was a catacomb drawing. So for someone's burial area, those catacombs are really great to go to. So this is from the 1st through the 2nd century, and we're looking at a unique experience. There's a struggle in the Christian community that's going on. Is Jesus another in a line of God's messengers, or is he the end of the one era and the beginning of the new one? This is a very important decision that they're going to have to make. Is he somehow in the previous prophetic line, rabbinical line, the line of David that has its own course, or is he a turning point? Is he something that's going to be radically different, radically new? And so this is a significant issue that they have to deal with in this context. In any of the historical Jesus scholars, probably a good number of them would say he's no more and no less than a continuation of the Jewish history. In everything he said and did, you could say he's a continuation. Jews would say perhaps until you decided to talk about him as God, he was okay. But now that you're talking about him as God, that's a turning point for us. That's a point of no return. Christians who were Gentiles said, circumcision, no thanks. I'm not interested in that direction for my life. I'm going to be only interested in this Jesus if he's heading in a radically different direction. So this is the tension that's going on right now. These churches are forming. There's preaching and teaching, and there are small groups, and there also begins to be a rift between Jews and Christians at this time, where you could see why that Jewish synagogues, where Christians were going, where Jesus went, where Paul went, we're starting to say, gosh, this is not our message. This is not, you keep saying that he is the one we've been expecting, but he doesn't sound like the one we've been expecting. And people have said that to us before, by the way. Jesus wasn't the first to be acclaimed as a Messiah. And so we'd rather you guys find your own worship space. So the rift occurs. There's some persecution going on, not a whole lot, but we do know that there's some for just getting into trouble and causing trouble. We see that in the book of Acts, for example, Christians are blamed for causing trouble, and that is not going to work for the Romans. And so there's anytime Christians cause trouble by inciting some kind of fervor, maybe some kind of riot. We know in Ephesus when Paul begins to he cures the woman who is the kind of the chief salesperson for the idol sellers. He heals her and a riot ensues, and this is what gets Paul in trouble, with Rome. Any kind of disorder. Also, the persecution gets some people to start thinking about that the end is near. He promised to come back. There was some mention things could be rough at the end. They're definitely rough now. Maybe this is it. So this is the context that we're in. And here, some of the scripture reflects this. We see in Matthew chapter 11. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" See, this is John. This is John who's been preparing the way. John who is, not worthy to untie his thong. But now John is in prison. Is he thinking to himself, wait a minute, I didn't think this is how it was all going to turn out. Jesus replied, go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. So this is the big question. Are you the one? And obviously answering no takes you one direction, and answering yes will take you in another. The classic Neo and the red and the blue pill in the Matrix. Are you going to take the one and wake up and forget this ever happened, or take the other one and see how deep the rabbit hole can go? One of my favorite movie lines. So
I guess John didn't hear, did he not hear God proclamation about this is my son whom I'm pleased
well, I
after
think
the baptism, or did he forget about that?
to be charitable, people have second thoughts, they do. And you'd think, what would it take for me not to ever have, second thoughts? You kind of like to think that it wouldn't take that much, but look at Peter. Look at all the miracles Peter saw.
Mhm.
Look at Judas. Look all he had been through.
Yeah,
So,
that's very true.
human
And a
nature.
lot of time has gone on. He's in prison.
And I don't know whether they reject him completely, or whether they reject him out of expediency, like to protect their skin,
Yeah.
But in John's case, he might be disappointed, because John expected, quite a big to do, and Jesus had to remind him that what he was doing was messianic, and I hope that John died knowing that he indeed had paved the way.
Maybe John was even hoping that he was going to get him out of prison. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Also, this idea of the last days, and the fact that Jesus is the turning point in these last days, not a continuation, not Abraham begets Isaac begets Jacob, right? Solomon follows continuity, but rather that Jesus is this radical break. And we see this in Hebrews. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his son. These last days, where the Hebrew writer thinks this is going to wrap up is soon. And that is only because of Jesus that it's going to wrap up soon. And so Christians at that time, one of their prayers was Maranatha, which means come, Lord Jesus. Turn it over. Let's flip the clock. And let's move past this time. So Jesus is seen as pivotal in these. And then in Revelation, we see John's discussion of the end. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. This is not the same as before. This is not what you're used to. It's not what you've experienced. And although it comes out of the past, it is a new future entirely. He said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. So there's where the Alpha and Omega we began with. Jesus now is not a Galilean rabbi. He is now the beginning and the end of an era, the beginning. And, we see this in some ways. What do we call the two portions of our Bible?
the New and the
Old
Old
Testament news.
Right. So we recognize that. What do we call our date? The dating system that we have under now.
AD and BC.
Right. The turning point of history. All the world, I think, or at least a great portion of it, counts their calendar on the Jesus time. And that came in the 6th century, but he comes out of this conviction that history's turning point is Jesus. So kind of to summarize, he's not viewed as a continuation of the former covenant with God. He's, in other words, not just another prophet, maybe a good one or an interesting one that will soon be followed by another one. He is a new promise, and it's in and through Jesus that this new promise comes. Jesus is not a messenger like John. Jesus kind of could be said to be the promise. He fulfills the old. So in other words, the old has been fulfilled. When I fulfilled your order, what else do I owe you? Nothing, right? When your order has been fulfilled, right? So when
nothing.
Nothing. So I fulfilled your order. And now he's going to make all things new until he returns. So that's the,
Andy.
Yeah.
Andy, Amazon has gotten famous by expanding and building all these new fulfillment centers. Maybe with after this study, we could rename the church, the Christian Fulfillment Center or something like that.
I like that. Yeah. Fulfillment Center. So questions about that. We've got the shift now that's gone on, and this is pre-established church. This is still people in a minority position, in a somewhat fragile position, some persecution going on, maybe some questions as to whether the faith will remain or whether it will have problems. And in the book of Hebrews, a big worry that Jews will go back to Judaism. And so we're saying, no, he is something new. In Hebrews, he is greater than angels. He's the greatest high priest. He is more than anything that came before us, more than Moses. All right, so then we're going to look at chapter 3, the light of the Gentiles. And we know, Luke, the prophecy is Jesus will be a light to lighten the Gentiles and the glory of thy people Israel. So what comes to your mind when you think of Jesus as the light?
Lighting the way, pointing the way, not pointing, I guess, but lighting the way in the darkness of the world around us.
Definitely.
Well, in him, there is no darkness
Oh, okay. Good.
and no shadow.
No shadow.
No shadow. Darkness, I mean,
I think there's also beauty revealed through the light.
Mhm.
Beauty in the world,
Definitely.
beauty of what Christ has afforded us.
It's the wonder of a sunrise. You look out and it just gets better and better if you have a pretty landscape, as the light comes up. And
you also think about being illuminated, like spiritually, mentally, or by your heart or mind.
okay.
A light illuminating, the aha light bulb above your head kind of thing,
Right.
where you get it, and it's like he's paved the way so that we can get it.
Right.
We get the love of God.
So
Excellent.
Teresa, Jesus gets a halo around his head and we get a light bulb.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
We only get the light bulb until he comes back.
Hopefully it's a pretty good light bulb. So illumination is obviously a spiritual, rich spiritual term. And the key here is that this illumination is now going to come to Gentiles. And the issue is going to be, how can we show them that Jesus is worthwhile to believe in? How can we tie into any of their past? Because we know that we can tie into the Jewish past. We know very well because we see the gospel writers and others doing it masterfully, constantly bringing up Old Testament connection points. But the Gentiles don't know the Old Testament. Most of them wouldn't have any access to it at all. Bunch of isolated scrolls in synagogues. And besides that,
in a different language, even.
different language that yeah, only scant people, few might understand. So what is the challenge going to be? So let's look at the context here. The context, we're in the 2nd through the 3rd century, and these are rough dates. The mission now is almost exclusively to the Gentiles. We've kind of moved past attempting through the synagogues and through other means to convert Jews. We are now either by kind of frustration or by opportunity. For some reason, Gentiles seem to take interest in this religion, and it might be that they're interested people in religion. That's something that we don't think about much. I don't know if as a person who attempted to interest people in religion, I felt my battle has been mostly uphill. But in this time period, there was not much uphill battle. Now, Russell, when he talks to people about Jesus, they don't know anything about him. So when he talks to them about Jesus, he's got people who might be curious. They don't know anything. If you talk to your neighbor about Jesus, what does your neighbor do?
Close the door.
They get nervous. They get nervous, right? What's going to happen? But everywhere we went, people were curious in Bangladesh to know more, which was a plus sign. Getting them to commit and getting them to become fully devoted disciples will be a challenge, but at least people show some interest. The Gentiles are like this. They've not heard of this Jesus. They are intrigued. But the question is, what kind of Messiah were they looking for? Was there going to be any connection? Because if there's no connection, then what's in it for them? What's in it for me is going to be everybody's question when it comes to making any kind of commitment. Is what do I get out of this? So I might be a little curious, but what do I get out of this?
Is everlasting life something? I don't know if any of the Greek or Roman gods, talked about being able to have the mortals achieve afterlife. Is that something that would be interesting to them?
Definitely. The idea that you had an afterlife that was blessed was a big draw. Clearly a big draw. And especially when life is nasty, brutish, and short, right? To know that there's something after. The other pagan religions devised a very unappealing afterlife. So there was definitely some value to that. And of course, they're going to want to know who gets me to that, right? If there is this thing, how do I get there, right? That's going to be the question. And so is Jesus going to be the answer? So they looked and they found several ways to come to the Gentiles and to talk to them about this promise that Jesus fulfills. Is a promise that Gentiles have been looking for. You just didn't know it. You didn't know they were looking for this. And they dug into their scriptures and they said, see, we've got Job, we got Jethro, and we got this guy named Balaam the prophet. All of these people were Gentiles, but they all had faith in this coming Messiah. So I think this is kind of I knew nothing about this, and it really helped me read Balaam's story in Numbers differently, to bring you up to speed on Balaam. The Israelites are on the edge of entering into the promised land, and they've just defeated several of the rulers of areas that are on the edge of, they call it the Transjordan, on the edge of the Jordan. And the last king that remains is a little bit nervous. He wants to try to get an edge on these marauders, desert marauders. So he sends a prophet, Balaam, who is a prophet of their God, to curse them. He sends Balaam to curse them. Balaam says, I will only do what the gods tell me. I'm not going to take this commission to go curse them until I hear from my gods. The king says, okay, fine, you go ahead. Well, it turns out Balaam hears from the Lord God. And Balaam hears from the Lord God. Their story is fun. There's a moment where a donkey gets upset with Balaam. It's pretty funny. And Balaam, kind of comes around to how God is working with him. And eventually Balaam refuses to curse the Israelites, no matter what his king says. And Balaam ends up saying that their God is great, and I'm not going to get involved in that. And then at this very end of his time, he speaks these words: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab. Edom will be conquered, but Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. So the early church preachers.
Andy,
Yes.
wasn't Jethro the father-in-law of Moses?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
It
Yep.
says Jesus on there.
Oh, sorry about that. Typo. I will.
Okay, because you kind of lost me while I was still trying to figure that out.
Nope, you're right, Moses. So, but this has a flavor of a prophecy, doesn't it? It's a prophecy. It's easily applied to Jesus, right? And it comes from a Gentile. So this is the first point of connection that preachers use to talk to Gentiles and say, you've got Gentile history for this guy. People have been talking about him for a long time. So let me tell you about Balaam and these others. They also use this idea of you have hopes in your past that are uniquely Gentile, not Jewish, but these hopes are fulfilled very handily in this Jesus, this light. I'm not sure how many of you have dipped into Virgil. I have not, but he was born 70 BC. And in his fourth eclogue, this would have been a Gentile poem, well known. Virgil was well respected. Virgil begins talking about like these hopes that he sees, that he believes in. And the hopes speak of a new heaven and a new earth. Surprise, surprise, as in Isaiah. So this is a non-Christian, non-Jew who is talking about a new heaven coming and a new earth. A new race from heaven. So Philippians talks about being born of a new nature. The birth of a child will begin this era. So we've got Isaiah 9:6, and we've got, of course, Jesus's birth. Wickedness will be destroyed. Okay, well, that's what everybody can hope for that, but it does parallel with Isaiah 53:5. And this is especially interesting. The serpent's going to be crushed. And we talked about that at the opening of our Bible study, that the serpent was that Jesus, one of his names was Serpent Crusher in a sense. So the Gentiles have these hopes, and astute preachers. Now, what we see in leadership in the church is rapidly upgrading in its education. You know, there may still have been fishermen turned into preachers, but preaching is becoming something that is done by like people like Paul, who was very well educated. And they knew this eclogue as part of their classic training. And so when they would talk to interested Gentiles, they could say, hey, remember the fourth eclogue? You know, like, yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And then they would be able to talk to them on that. So there were other similar longings that were coming out of the classic period. And the church fathers are masters in Plato and Socrates and Virgil and all these. They use these Gentile hopes to say, you know what, Jesus fulfills these. You were looking for these, but like Garth Brooks, you were looking, all your friends were in the wrong places, right? So now we look at another concept, which is called the type. That is that there is a type of savior, a type of redeemer that you are looking for, or that you have put forward in your past, but now we have the fulfillment of that type, that personality. So one is Odysseus, and the Homer's Odyssey and the stories that are part of Odysseus's search. In one of the stories, there's very troubled waters for their ship, terrible storm. And Odysseus says, tie me to the mast that I might be able to remain on board and see ahead. So preachers said, wow, who else got tied to a mast? Or something like it.
Well, not a mask, but a
Jesus.
cross, you mean, right?
Right.
Crucifixion.
Yeah. So they tie this wonderful, we call a type of Odysseus, which would have been a well-worn concept, and say this Jesus did that. He had himself bound in this, in the storms of existence to the mast, and he helps us see the way and get through the storm. That great picture there. I mean, and it is interesting to hear the church fathers talk about Odysseus and how Jesus is essentially the fulfillment of Odysseus. I'd never heard that before. We all know when Paul is in Corinth, he is visiting all the altars, quite open-minded, and he sees one, and he gathers people together, and he says, I see you have an altar with the inscription to an unknown God. Clearly, the Corinthians are hedging their bets that they haven't missed anybody. They've got all these altars, but God forbid, right? Or God's forbid that we might have missed one. And so what does Paul say to them?
I can tell you about this unknown God.
Right. So you didn't know this, and I'm going to come and name him. So, that's a powerful. So, when Russell's in Bangladesh, he needs to look for the hopes, right? That people have, the hopes they have, but haven't found in their faith, the hopes they have, but haven't found in their lives. He looks for those hopes. He might also look for hurts. That's another thing, because Jesus certainly can attend to those. But one way to look is to look at what hopes do people have and how might Jesus be the answer to their longing. It's a very powerful for all of us, you know. You must come across people who feel hopeless or are disappointed or are you know, feeling kind of like they don't have a future, and to be able to say, well, you know, I know the name of the future for you. That name is Jesus. You know, let's talk about that. In summary, the light of the Gentiles, Christianity is able to prove that it is not yoked to the Jewish faith, that it's not, you know, locked tied to it, but it's a new religion. And that new religion addresses the needs of the Gentiles. We're very fortunate this happened, right?
Oh, absolutely. Considering I think we're all Gentiles here.
Right, right. Yeah. There is something lost in this unyoking, which is not lost in all manner, but it's at least lost for a time, and it's always in danger of being lost. And that is that in our desire to express Christianity as having its own independence, we might disparage our heritage, and that would be a mistake. That would be, you know, the wrong idea. We may be something new, but we are not. We would not have that newness if it hadn't been for the promise as it was kept by the Jewish people, and it is still kept today. So the light of the Gentiles does not have to be something that in its fullness you know, condemns and puts the Jews in darkness. It would not need to do that. But we have to admit that there's been some language in Christianity up to the present that unfortunately does look at that way. You know, you can be when you grow up as a boy, there can be a moment, Springsteen calls it Independence Day, where you have essentially to turn your back on your father, and, you know, become your own man, but you're still your father's son, you know. And so there's a connection there, I think. Questions about Jesus being this light of the Gentiles? Yeah.
It's just sort of really question, not of the light, but I'm being unyoked. In the 18th century, we came up with a Judeo-Christian ethic. Is that taking us back?
Well, I think it's similar to when I hear people say that Jews, Christians, and Muslims are so alike because they all talk about one God, and essentially the God of Abraham. I'm quite certain that most of us would not feel, you know, very much kinship with Muslims. I mean, we might if we spend more time getting to know them, but by natural, you know, circumstances. So when they lump Judeo and Christian ethics together, it's kind of is it really a fair alliance? For example, 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, for Jews, right? What's the 10th commandment for Christians in regards to that? What's the corollary that we
Thou shalt not hate. Thou shalt not hate.
Yeah, we have part 1 and part 2, or A and B. So if you say Judeo-Christian ethics, in my opinion, you're really resolving around the Old Testament more than the New, because as I see the New Testament, we've got quite a distance in our ethical demands. We might love our neighbor in the same way Jews were told to, but who's our neighbor? Who's the Jew? Who's the Jew's neighbor technically? Jews, other Jews, right?
Yeah.
I'm quite certain Jews would tell you they don't think of it that way, but we're talking on a technicality.
Was the Good Samaritan a Jew?
No. So Christians are given this challenge to say, your ethics must go much further. You need to be a good neighbor to someone who hates you. That's what the Samaritan does. He's a good neighbor to someone who hates him, and he probably hated him too in return.
Yeah, we
But-
probably have a hard time telling them that they need to be good neighbors to the Palestinians, but especially.
Very-
point.
Yep. So the last topic for today is Jesus as the King of Kings. And, he's taken a long trip. Now, again, I go back to a Galilean peasant boy to being affirmed as the King of Kings. This isn't necessarily automatically assumed out of his resurrection. There's something particular you're saying when you say someone's a king. For Jesus to be raised is marvelous news. Does that automatically mean he's the King of Kings then? Or does it just mean that he's been raised? He's raised and he gets another life, or he gets another chance, or he shows us what life after death would look like. So to make the statement that he's the King of Kings is to say that he has power, a certain kind of authority and power. And in this case, very clearly, he's wearing a crown, and he's offering peace to the world. But he's the king, and he's clearly in charge. I wouldn't want to mess with him. So the King of Kings is the next one, and this is about the 4th century. And the reason why this becomes important is some things are going on in the culture, the time frame that is being experienced by Christians. Christianity goes from being a persecuted sect to the religion of the empire in the 4th century. It's quite remarkable. They begin the 4th century in the early 300s, running for their lives. By the end of it, the latter part of the 360 to 400, they've now become the religion of at least tolerance and ascendancy. Pretty soon, there will be no other religion in the empire. And something weird happens. A king becomes Christian. This has not happened before, right? Not for Christians. Christians haven't had their earthly power. Jews had had kings, right? But Christians hadn't had any. So if we now have a king, where does that leave Jesus? That'll be the question they have to work out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we figure this thing out? Where does this fall? Because the king's the greatest thing, right? King's the greatest thing you could ever experience, especially in those days.
The kingdom of God is not the same as the kingdom of earth.
Very good. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's one of their answers. That's actually Jesus's answer. So yeah, good. How does one reconcile this with other things we might know about Jesus? Are we comfortable with him being the King of Kings?
Well, Constantine was the one that
Yeah.
converted this from persecution to the religion, and he, as a king or as an emperor, acknowledged Jesus as his king. So you could say King of Kings in that respect, from an empire to, the emperor of Rome saying, I want you all to follow this king as king of Jesus.
Yeah. Good. Good. Excellent. All right. You guys have really anticipated well. We go back to the Old Testament, the sense of uneasiness about having a king, we can see in 1 Samuel. They wanted a king. This is the people are in the promised land. They're struggling. They've been through a series of judges who are not measuring up quite to what they're looking for. They look around and see that the success of other countries is that they have kings. And so they tell their prophet Samuel, give us a king. And the Lord tells him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. This idea that you don't need a king, you have God. God is your king. But God ends up giving in and saying, if you want a king, good luck. I can tell you, you might regret it. But he also asserts, I am your king. I would be enough for you. If you were faithful, you wouldn't even need one. But as it is, go ahead. So there's this antipathy about kings. And then we have that marvelous scene with Jesus and Pilate. Pilate went back into his headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. Are you the king of the Jews? He asked him. And it's impossible to tell. Is he being sarcastic? Probably. Was he curious? Some of the gospel writers seem to make us think that maybe he actually was interested. Depends on which movie adaptation you see. Jesus replied, is this your own question, or did others tell you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate retorted. Your own people and their leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done? Jesus answered, in this, we heard this, my kingdom is not an earthly kingdom. If it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over to the Jewish leaders. But my kingdom is not of this world. So you could see in this answer that Jesus very clearly sends forth his followers for several centuries of not desiring, needing, wanting, or expecting any kind of a king, and certainly nothing in this world. So that's the mindset. But something happens that challenges them. And that is what Daryl said. Constantine, the emperor, has a conversion to Christianity. It's an interesting story. Constantine is fighting a battle. Before the battle, he's meditating. He sees an image of a cross. He decides to put the image of the cross on all of his shields, and he wins the battle and dedicates himself to becoming a Christian. He's not baptized till his death, maybe because he wanted to still reserve his pagan pleasures. I don't know. But definitely becomes, surprisingly, one of the more coherent theologians of that day. Convenes a big gathering, and out of that gathering we get the Nicene Creed, in fact. So Constantine converts, and now we have a Christian emperor. Who do we owe our allegiance to now if we have a Christian emperor? And where does that put Jesus? Do we listen to Jesus? Do we listen to him? Does he speak Jesus's words to us? Is everything he does in keeping with Jesus now? Is he our new example to follow?
Render unto Constantine that which is Constantine, render unto God that which is God's.
Jesus did kind of answer that, didn't he, himself? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there was going to be a healthy suspicion in this matter. But they still needed to figure out where Jesus fit in, and simply dividing things didn't seem sufficient. In other words, saying that I only have a spiritual, I have a spiritual allegiance to Jesus and I have earthly allegiance to Constantine. Isn't there any relationship between Jesus and the king? Is there any relationship at all? That became the challenge. Well, we look in the Revelation, and we see Jesus himself coming in a sense as a king. From his mouth came a sharp sword to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron rod. On his robe was written this title, King of all kings and Lord of all lords. So maybe he's not the king. Maybe he's the king of all kings. The king of all kings, above them, in other words. And maybe their authority to rule, as Paul said, derives from the king of all kings. And maybe if the king of all kings is displeased, they lose their authority. So where we get is that Jesus gets elevated in the hierarchy of the universe to that above the king. And where we see this expressed is now, beginning in 800 AD, it's the Pope that crowns the king. So we see the coronation of Charlemagne. The Pope is conferring on behalf of the King of Kings the authority to this king. And this is necessary for a long time to be the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. One needed to be coronated by the vicar of Christ, the Pope. So now you see how they worked it out. Jesus is above the earthly powers. They have power. They might even exercise it for Christian means, directions, goals. That's good. That's good. But don't forget who crowned them. Who's the one that gave them that authority? And of course, the implication is he can take it away. He can take that authority away, or he can circumvent that authority with authority that of his words that you need to take. So in this country, for example, we are, pretty used to having Christian presidents. I think they all have been on one level or another. But we're not that used to taking Christian teachings from our presidents or taking Christian direction from our presidents, even if they've been, very prayerful about their leadership. We would not equate, I hope, their leadership to Christ's leadership. And so we'd be in danger if we do that, I would argue. So there's a beautiful scene there with them crowning Charlemagne. Now, this process got broken at an interesting time in history. We'll get to it later, I think, but it got broken with a very famous crowning of another emperor. Does anybody know this, when this break occurs where the Pope is not crowning the emperor? Think about 900 years after that. Charlemagne?
It was in France or something, I think, wasn't it? But I don't remember who it was.
Good for you, Napoleon.
Very good.
Okay.
Very good. Awesome, in fact. So what happens here is Napoleon, there's the Pope, and Napoleon is taking the crown that's been handed to him by the Pope, and Napoleon's going to put it on his head. He's going to crown himself. And that coronation, what does it signal?
But
What
it
is
seems a
everybody know?
separation there. There's a separation.
That's right. Does Napoleon derive his powers as king from the King of Kings?
No.
No, no. Complete, you know, separation of that egomaniac, you know, it took an egomaniac to separate the church and the state, I guess, in that case. But he was above, or at least not beneath, the King of Kings. I love that, you know, the humility here of Charlemagne versus, look at that arrogance of that Napoleon. Finally, the King of Kings. So kings may be Christian, but only Christ is the King of Kings. All their authority derives from his ultimate authority. So we had three particular views today. We looked at Jesus turning history around by being the pivot point from an old era, a good but an old promise, to a new era. And he is the one that can do that because he is the Alpha and Omega. He is the beginning and the end. Then we face the challenge of the Gentiles by pointing out that their hopes are found in Jesus, the light. And then we look at the challenge of having kings and being able to affirm that we may have kings, but Jesus is the King of Kings. So three pretty significant challenges. And then we'll be marching through the book, looking at some of these other, you know, other titles again. Anybody have questions about this, or any thoughts?
Okay. Nice.
Was that too much in 1 hour?
No, but a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I appreciate you all being here, and I hope that it's helpful. My final goal, I'll say again, is that, you know, Jesus is worth looking at in all sorts of perspectives, because it's one of the most important questions of our life that we want to answer. Who is Jesus? And in our era, who knows what answer we'll be called to give, and to know these others, and to know the circumstances for them developing and becoming helpful to people. I think in all of these cases, it's still useful today. In other words, it's not history, it's our story that we're going through now. So God bless everybody. And
Any
yes.
question? Next week, are we gonna, we kind of jump from 800 to 1800. Next week, are we gonna go in between some?
Oh, yes. Yep. I just wanted to show you when that process was concluded, because I just think that is such an interesting thing. All those years, the kings humbly allowed themselves to be crowned until Napoleon. Next week is Halloween, so we'll take Halloween night off, because if I try to do anything here,
2 weeks.
the
is
doorbell will
Halloween.
ring, the dogs will bark.
Isn't it 2 weeks?
I think it's 2. Yeah, it's 2
2
weeks.
weeks.
Oh, Halloween in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Yes. This
In-
17th.
Okay. Sorry
I
about
agree.
that.
Skip. We need to skip Halloween, but next week is
Right.
not Halloween.
So we'll be on next week, and next week we're going to start with the Cosmic Christ. So get your tie-dye shirts on. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Pastor
Night.
Andy.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.